Hello, this is an article from The Guardian, and I'm going through it with you mostly because I did think it rather amusing to study how The Guardian frames things or spins things. So it starts like this. A moment that changed me. Applying to be a spy felt thrilling until a stranger approached me on a train. And then Emma Hughes, the author of this piece, continues that in 2010, she was 23, had recently moved to London from Manchester. That's a big mistake because people in the north of England are a lot more friendly than people in London. And I remember when I moved to London myself, it was a real shock at how grim people could be in London. Anyway, she was becoming disillusioned with the Dream magazine job she'd just taken up. And then she saw an online questionnaire from MI5. Just for your information, MI5 is the security service of the British government. Its remit is to deal with security within the UK. They used to approach people at universities, but recently they took to widening their net by having applications online. You have to pass a quick questionnaire, and then if they think you seem like a reasonable prospect, they call you. You don't call them. MI5 refers to, well, it's where the organisation started. It was the 5th branch of the Directorate of Military Intelligence in the War Office. MI6, no surprises, was the 6th branch of the Directorate of Military Intelligence, and that was set up for secret work outside the UK. Those of you, by the way, interested in James Bond stories might already know that Ian Fleming was a spy during the war, working for naval intelligence, and he created the Bond character as an MI6 operative. Oh, and yeah. Possibly even more interesting was that his invention of Miss Moneypenny was a recreation of a woman called Vera Atkins, a real person who ran the Special Operations Executive, answerable only to, well, directly to Winston Churchill, I believe, and that was during World War II. And during her spy missions, she frequently masqueraded as a secretary. Of course, at that time, no one would have suspected that she was actually running the show. Anyway, back to MI5. So Emma Hughes had the idea of joining this distinguished bunch, and she took the online questionnaire. She passed that test. That I took it myself, actually, just because it looked interesting, and it doesn't require a lot to pass that, but I never went any further. She passed that test and then was invited in to attend a series of tests and interviews that lasted, apparently, it was over a period of months. It was pretty intensive. She had to, so it started off with general sorts of questions, but over the time, she had to answer more and more intrusive questions about her previous and private life. That was because they wanted to know everything about her, just against the possibility that she'd be somebody who'd be easily blackmailed. She was getting a little unsettled by that, but her blood ran cold when one day she was chatted up by a man on a train. It was a perfectly sort of normal interchange. But when they parted company, he said, "Nice to meet you, Emma Hughes," just as he got off the train. Needless to say, she hadn't given him her name. She was very unsettled and shocked by that, as many people would be. She realised she'd got to a stage where they were following her. Now, considering how unsafe London streets are sometimes. I'm not so sure I wouldn't have welcomed that. Then, a couple of weeks later, she was sent a letter informing her that she wasn't suitable after all, and they weren't proceeding with any more interviews. Now, all of this is so far so interesting. But the reason for me talking about it is her subsequent comments about the experience. This is what she said. Oh, the print's rather small. Hang on. I'm going to make that bigger. Oh, that's better. This is what she says about her being informed MI5 were no longer interested. I was told I couldn't appeal. It hurt. I felt as if I'd been dumped after a whirlwind romance. I can imagine that, because she'd been going to meetings over several, as she said, months, so it would have formed part of her life. So I understand that. I don't criticise it. And then she says, but deep down, I was relieved. My life moved on. I got another job, reconnected with old friends, made new ones. I was able to do things I never could have done had I become an intelligence officer, having flings, dyeing my hair loud colours, and writing a novel. The person I am now would make an absolutely terrible spy. Whenever I travel on the Piccadilly line, I feel overwhelmingly grateful that I got the chance to grow up into her being the person she's become. And that's probably true. She probably would have made a terrible spy if, at the back of her mind, she rather liked the idea of dyeing her hair purple and having a fling, or whatever. And I suppose that this is what MI5 picked up on in their interviews. So they were right, weren't they? This was not the job for her. It wasn't that they didn't like her, I'm quite sure. It was that they thought she had too much, maybe too much personality to be a good MI5 officer. I can imagine that a good MI5 officer is not a James Bond type at all, but a steady, pedestrian, unobtrusive character who just gets on with collating information. And also, as I understand it, in MI5, most people work in teams as well. So not so much an individual, although with a certain ability for original thought when it's necessary. That's fine. They realised she wasn't right for them, and she later on realised that she was happier doing what she's doing. But how did the tone of the article frame it? Well, was there a celebration of how good our secret services seemed to be, that they could identify an unsuitable candidate even after many months of questioning and investigating of her? No, not a bit of it. She had as far as she was concerned, as far as the tone of the article in The Guardian, she had a lucky escape from a very creepy organisation. And that was the impression she managed to give. Because The Guardian wouldn't give any arm of the government best, and obviously, unless it has something to do with the Labour Party, of course. And so it struck me as an example of how The Guardian's resting position on issues like this is always to the negative. They did her a favour, and they possibly did the country a favour as well by not choosing her. But did she say that? No, 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 no. They're just a bunch of creeps, and she was glad she escaped from them. And that's as far as she is prepared to talk about it. And The Guardian is prepared to print. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.